The rope burned through Gwendolyn Lancaster's gloved hands as she tumbled backward into the abandoned silver mine, her scream echoing off stone walls that hadn't heard a human voice in 15 years. She had been searching for her father's lost claim documents near the rim when the rotted boards gave way beneath her boots, and now darkness swallowed her whole as she plummeted into the earth's cold embrace. Above, silhouetted against the brilliant July sun of 1882, a figure threw himself to the ground and shouted down into the blackness. Xavier Cordell had been tracking wild mustangs through the sagebrush hills outside Caldwell, Idaho, when he heard the woman's cry pierce the afternoon air. He urged his buckskin gelding into a gallop, racing toward the sound, with his heart hammering against his ribs. When he reached the old Whispering Creek mine, he saw only disturbed dirt and broken timbers where someone had fallen through. Without hesitation, he grabbed the coiled rope from his saddle, secured one end to the nearest sturdy pine, and began lowering himself into the shaft. "Follow my voice to safety," he called down, his deep baritone carrying through the tunnels below. "I'm coming down to get you. Just stay calm and keep talking so I can find you." Gwendolyn lay sprawled on a ledge about 40 feet down, her body aching but miraculously intact. She could taste copper and dust on her tongue, and when she tried to move her left ankle, white-hot pain shot up her leg. Above her, she heard boots scraping against stone, the methodical descent of someone who knew how to handle himself in dangerous situations. She tried to respond, but her throat was too dry, clogged with fear and debris. "I can't hear you," the man's voice came again, closer now. "Make any sound you can. Tap on the rock if you have to." She fumbled for a loose stone and struck it against the ledge 3 times. The sound rang out clear and sharp. "Good," he said, and she could hear relief in his tone. "That's real good. I'm maybe 20 feet above you now. Can you tell me if you're hurt?" "My ankle," she managed to rasp out. "I think it's broken." "All right. We're going to get you out of here. My name is Xavier Cordell. What's yours?" "Gwendolyn Lancaster." "Well, Miss Lancaster, I'm going to need you to trust me. This shaft isn't stable, and we need to move quickly but carefully. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said, though her voice trembled. Xavier's boots touched down on the ledge beside her a moment later. In the dim light filtering from above, she could make out a tall man with broad shoulders, dark hair that fell past his collar, and eyes that assessed her injuries with practiced efficiency. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, his shirt dusty from the trail, his weathered hands competent as they checked her pulse and examined her ankle with surprising gentleness. "It's swollen, but I don't feel any bone protruding," he said. "That's good news. Now I'm going to tie this rope around both of us and we're going to climb out together. I'll take most of your weight. You just hold on to me and try to keep that ankle from banging against the wall." "I'm too heavy," Gwendolyn protested. "You can't carry us both up." "Miss Lancaster, I've pulled 300-pound calves out of ravines and dragged full-grown steers through snowdrifts. You don't weigh near enough to worry me. Now put your arms around my neck." She hesitated only a second before complying. As her arms circled his shoulders, she became acutely aware of the solid muscle beneath his shirt, the warmth of his body against hers, and the faint scent of leather and sage that clung to him. He secured the rope around them both, creating a makeshift harness that bound them together. "This might hurt your ankle some," he warned. "I'm sorry for that." Then he began to climb, using his legs to push against the shaft walls, his arms pulling them both upward with steady, relentless strength. Gwendolyn buried her face against his shoulder when the pain became too much, biting back cries that wanted to escape. His heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek, and his breathing remained even, despite the tremendous effort he was exerting. "Almost there," he murmured. "You're doing fine. Just fine." When they finally emerged into the blazing afternoon sunlight, Gwendolyn gulped in fresh air like a drowning woman breaking the surface. Xavier carried her away from the unstable mine opening and set her down gently in the shade of a juniper tree. He retrieved a canteen from his saddle and held it to her lips. "Slow sips," he instructed. "Not too fast." The water was warm, but tasted like salvation. As Gwendolyn's vision cleared and her breathing steadied, she got her first proper look at the man who had saved her life. Xavier Cordell was perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble and eyes the color of creekstones. There was a scar through his left eyebrow that gave him a slightly dangerous look, but his hands remained gentle, as he examined her ankle again in the better light. "We need to get you to Doc Hensley in town," he said. "Can you ride double with me, or should I rig up a travois?" "I can ride," Gwendolyn said, unwilling to cause him more trouble than she already had. She was acutely aware that her split skirt was torn, her white blouse was filthy, and her carefully pinned hair had come completely loose around her shoulders. At 22 years old, she had always prided herself on her composure and respectability. But right now, she looked like she had been dragged through a mine shaft, which was accurate enough. Xavier lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing and settled her sideways on his saddle before swinging up behind her. His arm came around her waist to steady her, and Gwendolyn felt heat that had nothing to do with the July sun flood her cheeks. She had never been this close to a man who wasn't family, never felt the intimate press of a male body against hers or the protective circle of strong arms holding her secure. "Comfortable as you can be?" he asked. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Cordell. Just Xavier's fine, and you don't need to thank me. Any decent person would have done the same." But Gwendolyn knew that wasn't true. The Whispering Creek mine was miles from any established road or settlement. If Xavier hadn't been tracking Mustangs in exactly this area at exactly this time, she would have died in that shaft, her bones joining whatever ghosts already haunted those tunnels. The realization made her shiver despite the heat. "You cold?" Xavier asked, his voice close to her ear. "No, just thinking about what almost happened." His arm tightened around her waist. "Don't think about it. You're safe now." The ride into Caldwell took nearly an hour. The town sat in a valley where the Boise River meandered through cottonwoods and willows, a green oasis in the high desert landscape of southern Idaho Territory. It had started as a mining camp during the gold rush days, but had settled into a respectable agricultural community with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a proper church with a white steeple, and even a small lending library. Gwendolyn's father, Marcus Lancaster, had brought her here 6 months ago to help him run the general store he had inherited from his brother. After her mother died 2 years past, Gwendolyn had been living with an aunt in Denver, teaching piano to children of wealthy families. But when her father wrote saying he needed her, she had packed her few belongings and made the journey west without hesitation. She loved her father fiercely, even though his obsession with finding his brother's lost silver claim had become something of a mania. "That's what I was doing out there," she told Xavier as his horse plodded steadily toward town, "looking for papers that might prove my uncle's claim to the Whispering Creek mine. Father's convinced there's still silver in those hills, that my uncle struck a rich vein before he died." "Your uncle died in that mine?" Xavier's voice carried a note of concern. "No, he died of pneumonia 3 winters ago. But he spent years working that claim, and Father thinks there are documents hidden somewhere that show exactly where the best deposits are. I thought I might find something in the old assay office building near the mine entrance, but the whole structure was more decrepit than I realized." "Miss Lancaster, meaning no disrespect to your father, but the Whispering Creek was played out 15 years ago. Every prospector in the territory knows that. Whatever silver was there got extracted long since." Gwendolyn bristled at the implied criticism. "My father is not a foolish man, Mr. Cordell." "I didn't say he was foolish, just maybe hopeful beyond what the facts support. There's a difference." She fell silent, unable to fully argue with him because she herself had harbored similar doubts. But loyalty to her father kept her from voicing them aloud to this stranger, no matter how much she owed him her life. They reached Doc Hensley's house at the edge of town as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. The doctor, a gruff man in his 60s with impressive mutton chops, took one look at Gwendolyn's ankle and began issuing orders to his wife to prepare bandages and fetch ice from the spring house. Xavier set Gwendolyn on the examination table and stepped back, hat in his hands. "I should go find your father," he said. "Tell him what happened. Where's your family's store?" "Lancaster's General Goods on Main Street," Gwendolyn said. "But please don't frighten him too badly. Tell him I'm fine before you explain about the mine." Xavier nodded and turned to leave, but Gwendolyn reached out and caught his sleeve. "Wait. I never properly thanked you. You saved my life today, Xavier Cordell. I won't forget that." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "Just glad I was in the right place at the right time. You take care of that ankle, Miss Lancaster." Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden porch, leaving Gwendolyn with a curious sense of loss that had nothing to do with the pain radiating from her injured leg. Doc Hensley confirmed that the ankle was badly sprained but not broken. He wrapped it tightly, gave her laudanum for the pain, and instructed her to stay off it for at least 2 weeks. By the time he finished, her father had arrived, his weathered face creased with worry and relief in equal measure. "Gwenny, my girl," Marcus Lancaster gathered her carefully into his arms. "That cowboy told me what happened. You could have been killed." "But I wasn't, Papa. Xavier got me out." "This Mr. Cordell is a true hero then. I'll have to find him and offer proper compensation for his trouble." Gwendolyn thought Xavier would probably refuse any monetary reward, but she kept that opinion to herself. Her father hired a wagon to transport her back to their living quarters above the general store, and Gwendolyn spent the rest of the evening propped up on the settee with her foot elevated, replaying the day's events in her mind. She kept seeing Xavier's face as he emerged from the darkness of the shaft, kept feeling the strength of his arms as he carried them both to safety, kept hearing his voice telling her to follow it. She had never believed in romantic notions of knights and rescuers, had always considered herself far too practical for such fantasies. But something about the way Xavier had risked himself without hesitation, had treated her with such gentle competence, had looked at her with those creek-stone eyes, made her heart beat faster whenever she thought of him. 3 days passed before she saw him again. She was sitting in a chair on the porch of the general store, her ankle still wrapped but healing well, when he rode up on his buckskin horse. He had clearly made some effort with his appearance, his jaw freshly shaved, his shirt clean, his dark hair combed back from his face. "Miss Lancaster," he greeted, dismounting and climbing the steps. "Heard you were recovering well. Wanted to see for myself." "That's very kind of you," Gwendolyn said, pleased by how steady her voice sounded, despite the sudden acceleration of her pulse. "Won't you sit down? I can have Father bring us some lemonade." "I'd like that," Xavier said, settling into the chair beside hers. He turned his hat in his hands, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a nervous habit. "Truth is, I've been thinking about you. Wanted to make sure you were all right, but also just wanted to see you again." His directness caught her off guard. In Denver, gentlemen approached courtship with elaborate social rituals and careful propriety. But this was the frontier, and apparently frontiermen spoke their minds. "I've been thinking about you too," she admitted, deciding his honesty deserved her own. "It's not every day a woman's life gets saved by a handsome cowboy." The corners of his mouth lifted in a smile that transformed his serious face. "You think I'm handsome?" "I think you know you are," Gwendolyn replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Marcus Lancaster emerged then, with a tray bearing glasses of fresh lemonade and a plate of sugar cookies his daughter had baked that morning. He shook Xavier's hand vigorously. "Mr. Cordell, I cannot thank you enough for what you did. My Gwendolyn means everything to me. If I had lost her." His voice broke and he had to stop. "No need to thank me, sir. I'm just glad I heard her fall." They talked for a while about the mine, about Xavier's work breaking and selling wild horses, about the dry summer and prospects for the fall harvest. Gwendolyn learned that Xavier had a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town where he ran a modest herd of cattle and kept his horse stock. He had come west from Missouri 7 years ago, seeking the kind of freedom and opportunity the frontier promised young men willing to work hard. "Do you have family back in Missouri?" Gwendolyn asked. "My parents died when I was young, cholera epidemic. I was raised by an uncle who was a good enough man but had 9 children of his own. When I turned 19, I figured it was time to make my own way. Been in Idaho territory ever since." There was no self-pity in his voice, just simple statement of fact. But Gwendolyn's heart ached for the boy he must have been, alone and grieving, setting out into an uncertain world. Her own mother's death had devastated her, and she had still had her father for comfort. Xavier had faced his losses with no one. "You've done well for yourself," she said softly. "Well enough. The ranch won't make me rich, but it's mine. Every acre. That means something." After Xavier left that afternoon, Marcus gave his daughter a knowing look. "That's a good man, Gwenny. Solid and honest. The kind who would stick through hard times." "Papa, he just came to check on my recovery. Don't start matchmaking." But her father just chuckled and returned to his work, and Gwendolyn sat on the porch, watching Xavier ride away until he disappeared from view. Over the next 2 weeks, Xavier found reasons to come into town nearly every day. He needed supplies from the general store. He had business with the livery. He wanted to check on Miss Lancaster's recovery. Each visit lasted a little longer. The conversations ranged a little wider, and the attraction between them grew stronger and harder to ignore. Gwendolyn found herself watching for him, her heart leaping whenever she heard hoofbeats on the street. They talked about books and discovered a shared love of adventure stories. They discussed music, and she learned he had a surprisingly good singing voice, picked up from his aunt who had taught all the children hymns. They debated politics and women's suffrage, and he impressed her by actually listening to her opinions rather than dismissing them as so many men did. "My mother was one of the smartest people I knew," Xavier said one afternoon as they sat by the river, Gwendolyn's healing ankle resting on a folded blanket. If she had been born a man, she could have been a doctor or a lawyer. But because she was a woman, her choices were limited. Always seemed wrong to me. "That's exactly how I feel," Gwendolyn said eagerly. "I love teaching music, but I wanted to study composition at a conservatory. My aunt said that was no proper ambition for a young lady. Said I should focus on finding a husband instead. If you want to study composition, you should do it. A husband worth having would support that." The way he looked at her when he said it made Gwendolyn wonder if he was talking theoretically or making a statement about himself. Before she could pursue the thought, her father appeared on the path, waving them back toward town. "Gwenny, we have customers," Marcus called. "Mrs. Patterson wants to order fabric for her daughter's wedding dress." Gwendolyn allowed Xavier to help her up, his hands warm and steady on hers. They had touched many times now, casual contact that would have been scandalous in Denver, but seemed natural here. Each touch sent pleasant shivers through her, and she found herself looking for excuses to brush against him, to take his offered arm, to sit close enough that their shoulders touched. "I should let you get back to work," Xavier said reluctantly. "But there's a barn dance at the Thompson place this Saturday evening. Would you permit me to escort you?" "My ankle is much better, but I don't know if I'm ready for dancing yet." "Then we'll just go for the music and the company. I promise to keep you off your feet." How could she refuse when he smiled at her like that? "I'd love to go with you, Xavier." Saturday arrived with perfect summer weather, warm but not oppressive, with a breeze that carried the scent of new mown hay across the valley. Gwendolyn wore her best dress, a soft blue cotton that brought out the green in her hazel eyes and pinned her honey-colored hair up in a style that was fashionable but not too elaborate. When Xavier arrived to collect her in a borrowed wagon, scrubbed clean and wearing a white shirt that made his sun-bronzed skin look even darker, she had to catch her breath. "You look beautiful," he said, and the reverence in his voice made her feel like the most desirable woman in the territory. "You look rather handsome yourself, Mr. Cordell." "I thought we agreed you'd call me Xavier." "Xavier," she repeated, liking the feel of his name on her lips. The Thompson barn had been cleared of equipment and decorated with wildflowers and paper lanterns. A three-piece band consisting of a fiddle, a banjo, and a guitar filled the space with lively music, and couples whirled across the packed dirt floor in energetic reels and waltzes. Gwendolyn sat on a hay bale with her ankle propped up, tapping her good foot in time to the music, and Xavier sat beside her, close enough that his thigh pressed against her skirt. They talked little, content to listen to the music and watch the dancers. But every so often, Xavier would lean close and point out something happening across the barn, his breath warm against her ear, his voice low and intimate. Or he would rest his hand on the small of her back, a possessive gesture that thrilled her more than she wanted to admit. When a slow waltz began, Xavier stood and offered her his hand. "Your ankle up for one careful dance?" "I don't think I should risk it," Gwendolyn said regretfully. "Then come outside with me. We can hear the music just as well, and you can lean on me instead of putting weight on that foot." They walked out into the summer evening, the sky above them ablaze with stars. The music drifted through the open barn doors, sweet and melodic. Xavier put one arm around Gwendolyn's waist and took her hand in his, and they swayed together under the vast Idaho sky. "This is better than dancing anyway," he murmured. Gwendolyn rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in his scent of clean soap and leather. She could feel his heart beating, could feel the leashed strength in his body, could feel the way he held her like she was something precious. When the song ended, he didn't release her immediately. Instead, He tilted her chin up with gentle fingers and looked down at her with an expression that made her knees weak. "Gwendolyn, I know it hasn't been long since we met, but I need you to know that I have very serious feelings for you. I'd like to court you proper, if your father approves and if you're willing." "I'm willing," she whispered, "more than willing." He smiled then, brilliant and joyful, and lowered his head to kiss her. It was her first real kiss, soft and careful, asking rather than demanding. Gwendolyn rose on her toes, ignoring the twinge in her ankle, and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks. His arms tightened around her, and the kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and passionate that left them both breathless when they finally broke apart. "I'm falling in love with you," Xavier said against her hair. "I didn't mean to happen so fast, but I can't help it." "I'm falling in love with you too," Gwendolyn admitted. "From the moment you lowered yourself into that mine shaft to save me, I think part of me already knew." They spent the rest of the summer courting in earnest. Xavier came to Sunday dinner every week and charmed Marcus with his work ethic and honest nature. They went on picnics by the river, took long rides when Gwendolyn's ankle had fully healed, and spent hours sitting on the porch of the general store talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. Gwendolyn learned that Xavier wanted to expand his ranch, maybe start breeding horses seriously rather than just breaking wild ones. He wanted to build a proper house with glass windows and a wraparound porch. He wanted children someday, a whole brood of them to fill the empty spaces his own lonely childhood had left inside him. She told him about her music, about the compositions she worked on late at night when the store was closed and the town was quiet. She played for him on the old upright piano in the back room, and his obvious appreciation for her talent meant more than any formal education could have. She admitted that she wanted to publish her music someday, wanted to see her name printed on sheet music that people all across the country might play. "You will," Xavier said with absolute certainty. "You're too talented not to succeed." His faith in her was unwavering, and it gave her courage to believe in herself. In late August, Marcus took Xavier aside for a private conversation in the store. Gwendolyn watched nervously from upstairs, but when the two men emerged an hour later, both were smiling. That evening, Xavier asked her to take a walk with him down to the river where they had spent so many afternoons. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and crimson. Xavier led her to a flat rock that jutted out over the current and helped her sit down before dropping to one knee beside her. "Gwendolyn Lancaster, I came to this territory looking for land and freedom and a chance to build something of my own. I found all that, but I never expected to find love. You are everything I didn't know I was searching for. You're beautiful and smart and talented and brave. You make me want to be a better man, to work harder, to dream bigger. I don't have much to offer you right now except a small ranch and a heart that belongs completely to you. But I swear that I will spend every day of my life working to make you happy and proud. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Gwendolyn's face as she pulled him up to sit beside her. "Yes, Xavier. Yes, I will marry you. You say you don't have much to offer, but you've given me everything that matters. You see me as I truly am, and you value all the parts of me that other people said I should hide or minimize. You saved my life, and then you made it worth living. Of course I'll marry you." He kissed her then, long and deep and full of promise. When they returned to the store hand in hand to share the news with Marcus, her father embraced them both and declared he had known from the start they were meant for each other. "I'll need a few weeks to plan a proper wedding," Gwendolyn said, her mind already spinning with details. "Take all the time you need," Xavier assured her. "I've waited my whole life for you. A few more weeks won't hurt." They set the date for late September, after the harvest was in but before the weather turned cold. The entire town rallied to help with preparations. Mrs. Patterson sewed Gwendolyn's wedding dress from yards of ivory silk that Marcus ordered special from San Francisco. The women of the church decorated the sanctuary with late summer flowers and golden aspen leaves. The Thompson family offered their barn again for the reception, and every family in the valley contributed food and drink for the celebration. The night before the wedding, Gwendolyn lay awake in her room above the store, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Xavier Cordell. Tomorrow she would leave her childhood home and move to the ranch to begin her new life. The prospect filled her with equal parts anticipation and terror. A soft tap on her door made her sit up. Her father entered, carrying an oil lamp that cast warm shadows across the walls. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, settling into the chair by her bed. "Too much on my mind," Gwendolyn admitted. "Your mother would have loved Xavier," Marcus said. "She always hoped you would find someone who appreciated your spirit rather than trying to tame it." "Do you think I'm making the right choice, Papa? I love him so much it frightens me sometimes. What if something goes wrong?" "Something probably will go wrong eventually. That's life. You'll fight sometimes, or money will be tight, or one of you will get sick. But love isn't about avoiding trouble. It's about facing trouble together and coming out stronger on the other side. Xavier is a good man who loves you truly. That's the foundation for a good marriage. The rest, you'll figure out as you go." "I'm going to miss you," Gwendolyn said, her voice breaking. "I'm only 5 miles away, girl. And I expect you and Xavier to visit often, especially once you start giving me grandchildren." She laughed through her tears and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for letting me come here, Papa. If you hadn't asked me to help with the store, I never would have been at that mine. I never would have met Xavier." "Everything happens for a reason," Marcus said, "even falling into mine shafts." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the first hint of autumn. Gwendolyn dressed with the help of several townswomen who fussed over every detail of her appearance. The silk dress fit perfectly, nipping in at her waist before flowing out in elegant folds. Her hair was pinned up with fresh flowers woven through the curls, and she wore her mother's pearl earrings for something borrowed. When she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw only Xavier waiting for her at the altar. He looked devastatingly handsome in a new black suit, his hair slicked back, his creekstone eyes bright with emotion. When she took her place beside him and he took her hands in his, she felt the rightness of it in her bones. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The reception lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and enough food to feed twice as many people as attended. Xavier danced every dance with his bride, whirling her across the barn floor until they were both breathless and laughing. When it was finally time to leave, rice rained down on them as they climbed into the wagon for the ride to Xavier's ranch, which was now their ranch. The house was small but sturdy, just 3 rooms plus a loft. Xavier had spent the past week cleaning and fixing it up, adding curtains to the windows and wildflowers in jars on every surface. He carried Gwendolyn over the threshold and set her down gently in what was now their bedroom. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cordell," he said softly. She reached up to frame his face with her hands. "Take me to bed, husband." Their wedding night was tender and passionate by turns, a discovery of each other that left them both shaken and satisfied. Gwendolyn had been nervous about the physical side of marriage, but Xavier's patience and obvious desire for her pleasure as much as his own made it beautiful. Afterward, she lay in his arms, listening to his heartbeat, slow, and feeling more content than she had ever imagined possible. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he murmured against her hair. "Always will." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Gwendolyn woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and Xavier's arm heavy across her waist, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The ranch demanded constant work, from feeding livestock to mending fences to putting up hay for winter. Gwendolyn, who had never done manual labor beyond light housework, had to learn quickly how to manage a ranch household. She burned more dinners than she cared to admit, struggled to get the hang of doing laundry in the creek, and once accidentally let all the chickens out of their coop. But Xavier never criticized or complained. He taught her patiently, praised her efforts, and made her feel capable even when she felt hopelessly inadequate. And in turn, she brought music and laughter into his solitary life. She played the piano he bought her for Christmas until her fingers ached, filling the house with melody. She read aloud to him in the evenings while he mended tack or whittled. She made their small house a home with bright quilts and good cooking and her constant, steady love. In the spring, Gwendolyn realized she was pregnant. The news filled Xavier with such joy that he couldn't stop grinning for days. He became almost absurdly protective, insisting she rest more and lift nothing heavier than a tea kettle. Her father visited weekly, bringing supplies and advice and excitement about becoming a grandfather. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer and into fall. In late October, when the aspens were gold and the nights were getting cold, Gwendolyn went into labor. Xavier rode hell-bent for leather to fetch Doc Hensley and then paced the house like a caged animal while the doctor and a midwife attended his wife. Her labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and Xavier aged years listening to her cries of pain. But when Doc Hensley finally emerged from the bedroom carrying a squalling bundle, Xavier's fears evaporated. "You have a son," the doctor announced, "a big, healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully." Xavier held his son for the first time with shaking hands, marveling at the tiny, perfect features, the miniature fingers that wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. Gwendolyn, exhausted but radiant, smiled at the picture they made. "What should we name him?" she asked. "I was thinking we could call him Marcus after your father," Xavier suggested. Tears filled her eyes. "Papa would love that. Marcus Cordell. It's perfect." Their son proved to be a good baby, healthy and happy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's hazel eyes. Xavier was a natural father, patient and gentle with the infant, willing to walk the floors at night when Marcus was fussy. Watching her husband cradle their son and sing lullabies in his deep voice made Gwendolyn fall even more deeply in love with him. Over the next few years, their family and their ranch both grew. They added more acres, expanded the horse herd, and began to earn a reputation for quality stock. Gwendolyn's music compositions started selling to a publisher in San Francisco, bringing in modest but steady income and giving her great satisfaction. When Marcus was 3, they welcomed a daughter they named Charlotte, a delicate beauty who inherited her mother's love of music. 2 years later came another boy, Henry, who was as rough and tumble as his older brother. The house that had seemed adequate when it was just the two of them became cramped with 3 children. In 1889, Xavier hired a carpenter, and together they built an addition, doubling the size of their home. They added a proper parlor with space for Gwendolyn's piano and a big dining room where the whole family could gather. The children grew up running wild across the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores as soon as they were able. Marcus Lancaster remained a constant presence in their lives until his death in 1895. He passed peacefully in his sleep at age 71, having lived long enough to see his daughter happy and his grandchildren thriving. His loss hit Gwendolyn hard, but she took comfort in knowing he had been proud of the life she had built. They buried him in the Caldwell Cemetery under a headstone that read, "Beloved Father and Grandfather," and Gwendolyn planted roses that bloomed every summer. The turn of the century found Xavier and Gwendolyn in their early 40s, their children growing toward adulthood. Marcus Jr. at 17 was already helping run the ranch and had his father's steady competence with horses. Charlotte at 14 was a talented pianist who dreamed of going to a music conservatory. Henry at 12 was still all boyish energy and mischief, but showed promise as a horseman. One evening in the summer of 1900, Xavier and Gwendolyn sat on the porch they had dreamed of years ago, watching the sun set over the mountains. The sounds of their children's laughter drifted from inside the house where they were playing a card game. "Do you ever think about that day at the mine?" Gwendolyn asked, resting her head on Xavier's shoulder. "All the time," he admitted. "Best day of my life, even though you could have died. You didn't even hesitate. You just lowered yourself into that shaft after me." "Of course I didn't hesitate. Even then, before I knew your name or anything about you, something in me recognized that you were important, that you were mine to protect. Your voice calling down to me, telling me to follow it to safety, was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I knew right then that I could trust you completely." Xavier turned to kiss her temple. "I would do it again in a heartbeat, lower myself into 100 mine shafts if it meant finding you." "I hope that's not necessary," Gwendolyn said with a laugh. "One near-death experience was quite enough." "Fair enough. But you understand what I mean. You're my whole world, Gwenny. You and the children. Everything good in my life flows from that moment I heard you fall and decided to go after you." She turned to face him fully, studying the face she knew as well as her own. Xavier at 44 was even more handsome than he had been at 26, his features carved by time and weather into something distinguished. Silver threaded through his dark hair, and the crow's feet at his eyes had deepened from years of squinting into the sun. But his creekstone eyes still held the same warmth and devotion they had on their wedding day. "I love you, Xavier Cordell, more now than even on the day I married you, and I didn't think that was possible. I love you too. Always have, always will." They sat together as twilight deepened into night, hands clasped, hearts entwined, grateful for a love that had started in the darkness of a mineshaft and had grown into something bright and enduring. Inside, their children argued good-naturedly about the card game. Beyond the porch, the ranch they had built together spread out in the gathering darkness. Above them, stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss all those years ago. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Seasons turned, children grew, and Xavier and Gwendolyn grew older, together with grace and gratitude. Marcus Jr. married a sweet-natured girl from town and took over more of the ranch operations, giving Xavier time to focus on the horse-breeding operation that had become his passion. Charlotte did indeed go to a music conservatory in Chicago, returning home with a music degree and eventually opening a teaching studio in Caldwell. Henry, after a brief period of wildness in his late teens, settled down to become a gifted horse trainer who worked alongside his father and older brother. In 1910, Gwendolyn achieved a lifelong dream when a prestigious publisher in New York released a collection of her compositions. The book was titled Songs of the West and featured pieces inspired by her life in Idaho. Critics praised the work's emotional depth and authentic frontier spirit, and it sold well enough that the publisher requested a second volume. Gwendolyn, now in her 50s, threw herself into composing with renewed energy. Xavier couldn't have been prouder. He attended her first public performance in Boise, sitting in the front row and applauding loudly enough to embarrass their children. Afterward, he told anyone who would listen that his wife was the most talented woman in the territory. "You're biased," Gwendolyn said, laughing at his enthusiasm. "Absolutely," Xavier agreed, "but I'm also right." They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1911 with a large party at the ranch. Friends and family came from across the region to honor the couple whose love story had become something of a legend in Caldwell. The tale of how Xavier had lowered himself into the mineshaft to save Gwendolyn and how that rescue had sparked a romance had been told and retold until it took on mythic qualities. "Tell us again how you met," one of their grandchildren begged. Xavier and Gwendolyn exchanged glances and smiled. They had told this story dozens of times, but it never grew old. "Your grandmother was exploring where she shouldn't have been," Xavier began with mock sternness, "and your grandfather happened to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time," Gwendolyn continued. "I heard her fall into that mineshaft, and I knew I had to get to her. He lowered himself down into the darkness after me and told me to follow his voice to safety. And I've been following that voice ever since," Xavier finished, pulling Gwendolyn close. The children groaned at the sappy ending, but the adults sighed with appreciation. It was a good story, made better by the fact that it was true and had led to 3 decades of evident happiness. As they entered their 60s, Xavier and Gwendolyn began to slow down. The ranch work fell increasingly to Marcus Jr. and Henry, though Xavier still insisted on working with the horses he loved. Gwendolyn spent her days composing, teaching music to her grandchildren, and tending the extensive flower gardens she had cultivated over the years. They talked often about how fortunate they had been, how many blessings had flowed from that fateful day in 1882. 3 healthy children who had all found their own paths in life. 7 grandchildren who brought joy and chaos in equal measure. A ranch that had prospered and provided for them generously. Recognition for Gwendolyn's musical talents. Most importantly, a marriage built on mutual respect, deep friendship, and abiding love. "No regrets?" Xavier asked one evening as they sat on their porch, a ritual that had become sacred over the decades. "Not a single one," Gwendolyn replied. "You?" Only that I can't live this life all over again, but I suppose that's what makes it precious, that we only get the one chance. In 1920, they celebrated their 40th anniversary more quietly, with just family gathered at the ranch. Charlotte brought her husband and 4 children. Henry came with his wife and their 2 sons. Marcus Jr.'s wife had passed away from influenza 2 years earlier, but he attended with his 3 children, all of whom were essentially grown. Xavier, now 64 and showing his age more clearly, stood to make a toast. 40 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I had ever met. She was beautiful and talented and brave enough to fall into a mine shaft. Laughter rippled around the table. I thought I was rescuing her that day, but the truth is, she rescued me right back. She took a lonely cowboy and gave him a family, gave him purpose, gave him love. Everything good in my life started the moment I lowered myself into that mine shaft after her. Here's to Gwendolyn, the love of my life. To Gwendolyn, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Gwendolyn dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. Xavier Cordell, you've made me cry at every anniversary for 40 years. That's because I mean every word, Mrs. Cordell. That night, lying in bed in the room they had shared for 4 decades, Gwendolyn studied her husband in the moonlight streaming through the window. Age had marked them both. Xavier's hair was fully silver now, his body still strong but not as powerful as it had been. Her own face showed lines, and her hands were spotted with age. But when she looked at him, she still saw the handsome cowboy who had saved her life. And when he looked at her, she could see in his eyes that he still found her beautiful. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her watching him. "That I would do it all again, fall into that mine, hurt my ankle, depend on you to save me. Because it led to this, to us, to everything we've built together." Xavier pulled her close, settling her head on his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. "Follow my voice to safety. That's what I told you down in that shaft. But the truth is, you've been my safety all these years. You're my home, Gwenny. Always have been." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 4 decades of love and devotion. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had on their wedding night, just as they had on countless nights since. The next morning dawned clear and warm, the kind of Idaho summer day that made you grateful to be alive. Xavier and Gwendolyn had breakfast on the porch with their visiting children and grandchildren. Plans were made for the day, with the younger generation wanting to ride out to the far pasture to see the new foals. "You should come with us, Grandpa," one of Henry's boys urged. "You know everything about horses." Xavier glanced at Gwendolyn, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead. I'm going to work on my composition, and I need quiet for that anyway." So Xavier saddled up and rode out with his sons and grandchildren, feeling the old familiar joy of being on horseback under the wide Montana sky. They spent hours looking at the horses, with Xavier pointing out bloodlines and conformation and temperament. When they returned to the house in late afternoon, sunburned and dusty and happy, they found Gwendolyn at her piano, completely absorbed in her music. She looked up when they entered, her face alight with creative energy. "I've nearly finished the piece. It's the best thing I've ever written." "Play it for us," Charlotte urged. So Gwendolyn played, her fingers moving surely over the keys despite their age. The music that filled the parlor was haunting and beautiful, speaking of love and loss and endurance. It painted pictures of mountains and rivers and wide open spaces. It told the story of a life well lived and a love that had lasted. When the last notes faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Xavier crossed to his wife and kissed the top of her head. "That was magnificent. What are you going to call it?" Gwendolyn smiled up at him. "I thought I'd call it the mine shaft, because that's where this all started." The family stayed for several more days before gradually returning to their own lives and homes. Marcus Jr., who lived closest, promised to check in regularly. Charlotte extracted a promise that they would visit her in Caldwell soon. Henry made plans to bring his family back for Christmas. When the house was quiet again, just Xavier and Gwendolyn rattling around in the big rooms, they both admitted to being relieved. They loved their children and grandchildren dearly, but solitude had its own pleasures after so many years together. "We're getting old," Gwendolyn observed one evening. "We are," Xavier agreed, "but we're getting old together, and that makes all the difference." They continued their life together, seasons passing in comfortable rhythm. Xavier still worked with the horses, though less intensely now. Gwendolyn still composed, though she tired more easily. They took afternoon naps together, held hands on their evening porch sits, and never went to bed angry after the rare arguments that arose. In the fall of 1924, Xavier developed a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. The doctor diagnosed pneumonia and confined him to bed. Gwendolyn nursed him with fierce determination, but the illness was stubborn. For 2 weeks he fought it, and there were days when it seemed he might recover. But one morning in late October, as golden leaves fell outside their bedroom window, Xavier's breathing became labored. Gwendolyn sent for the children, knowing the end was near. They gathered around his bed, holding his hands, telling him they loved him. Xavier's eyes found Gwendolyn's face and held. "No regrets," he whispered. "No regrets," she echoed through her tears. "Thank you for loving me. Thank you for saving me." "Thank you for being worth saving," he said. Then, with his family surrounding him and his beloved wife's hand in his, Xavier Cordell closed his eyes for the last time. He was 68 years old. The grief nearly broke Gwendolyn. For 42 years, Xavier had been the center of her world, her partner in everything, her greatest love. The house felt empty without him, the bed too large, the silence oppressive. Her children worried about her, but she assured them she would be all right eventually. "He gave me the best life anyone could ask for," she told them. "I'm not going to dishonor that by falling apart. He would want me to keep living, keep creating music, keep enjoying what time I have left." And that's what she did. Gwendolyn threw herself into composing with an intensity that surprised her children. She wrote piece after piece, pouring her grief and love into the music. The collection she completed that winter was her most powerful work yet, a suite she called Love Letter, that traced the arc of her marriage from that first meeting through 4 decades together to Xavier's death. When it was published the following year, critics hailed it as a masterpiece. Letters poured in from people who had been moved by the music, who recognized the universal truths about love and loss that Gwendolyn had captured. She was invited to perform in concert halls across the country, and though she was nearly 65 years old, she accepted. For 2 years she toured, playing her music and telling Xavier's story to audiences everywhere. It gave her purpose and helped her heal. But eventually she grew tired and ready to come home. She returned to the ranch in the spring of 1927, settling back into the rhythms of rural life. Marcus Jr. and his new wife lived in the main house now, taking care of Gwendolyn and running the ranch. Henry and his family had built a house on the adjoining property. Charlotte visited often from town. The grandchildren, many of them now adults themselves, came and went. Gwendolyn spent her days tending her gardens, playing her piano, and sitting on the porch where she and Xavier had passed so many peaceful evenings. She missed him constantly, achingly, but she also felt his presence everywhere, in the house they had built together, in the ranch they had grown, in the children and grandchildren they had created. On a warm July afternoon in 1930, Gwendolyn sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, watching her great-grandchildren play in the yard. She was 70 years old and felt every day of it, but contentment filled her heart. What a life she had lived, what love she had known. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, a strange drowsiness came over her. She closed her eyes, intending to rest for just a moment. In her mind, she heard Xavier's voice, as clear and strong as it had been that day in the mine shaft nearly 50 years ago. "Follow my voice to safety." And with a smile on her lips, Gwendolyn followed. They found her there under the cottonwood tree, peaceful as if sleeping, her expression serene. The family grieved, but they also celebrated a life beautifully lived and a love that had endured beyond death itself. They buried her next to Xavier in the Caldwell Cemetery, under a shared headstone that read, "Xavier and Gwendolyn Cordell, together always." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each new owner hearing the story of how it had all begun. The tale of the cowboy who lowered himself into a mine shaft to save a woman he didn't know, and how that act of courage sparked a love that lasted a lifetime, became part of local legend. Gwendolyn's music continued to be performed and published, introducing new audiences to the story behind the compositions. In Caldwell, where their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued to live, Xavier and Gwendolyn's love story was told to each new generation. It was a reminder that true love exists, that courage matters, that following your voice to safety sometimes means taking a leap of faith into darkness, trusting that someone will be there to catch you. The old Whispering Creek mine, the site where it had all started, eventually collapsed completely. But a historical marker was placed nearby, telling the story of the rescue and the romance that followed. Couples would sometimes hike out to the spot, holding hands and imagining that moment when Xavier heard Gwendolyn fall and didn't hesitate to go after her. Because that's what love is, really. It's hearing someone cry out in darkness and lowering yourself into the unknown to reach them. It's saying, "Follow my voice to safety," and meaning it with your whole heart. It's building a life together through hard work and dedication and countless small acts of devotion. It's lasting through seasons and years and decades until death finally parts you. And even then, not really, because love that deep leaves echoes that resonate forever. Xavier and Gwendolyn Cordell knew that kind of love. They lived it fully, from that July day in 1882, when a mine shaft became the unexpected sight of destiny, through 4 decades of marriage, children, grandchildren, joy, sorrow, success, and simple daily life on an Idaho ranch. They proved that falling in love quickly doesn't mean loving shallowly, that instant attraction can deepen into lifelong devotion, that taking a chance on someone can change everything. Their story ended as all stories must, with death claiming first one and then the other. But the love they shared, the family they built, and the example they set continued long after they were gone. In the faces of their descendants, in the music that still played, in the ranch that still stood, Xavier and Gwendolyn's love lived on. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the wind whispers through the cottonwoods and the stars emerge one by one in the vast Idaho sky, people swear they can hear music drifting on the air. Sweet and haunting, joyful and sad, it speaks of a cowboy and the woman he saved, of a voice calling through darkness promising safety, of a love that started in a mine shaft and grew to fill a lifetime. Follow my voice to safety, the music seems to say. Follow it home, follow it to love, follow it to everything that matters. And if you listen closely enough, if you quiet your heart and open yourself to the possibility, you might just hear what Gwendolyn and Xavier knew all along. That safety isn't just about rescue. It's about finding the person who makes you feel seen and valued and cherished. It's about building something together that's stronger than either of you alone. It's about facing darkness hand in hand, knowing that as long as you have each other, you can survive anything. That's the legacy of Xavier and Gwendolyn Cordell. Not just a romantic story to tell around campfires, though it served that purpose well, but a testament to the enduring power of love, the importance of courage, and the beautiful possibility that sometimes, when you fall into darkness, someone brave and true will lower themselves down after you and lead you to safety, to home, to forever.